I have with me today Bethany Bell, who is the owner and principal trainer for Canine Dialogue Dynamics. And I'm going to bring her on right now. What's up, Bethany? Can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you.
Excellent, excellent. This has been a meeting of the minds that I feel like has been in the works for a long time. A lot of people have been saying you and I should chat and pool our superpowers, and that there's a lot of alignment and crossover in what we do, which I'm dying to learn more about. And I think a lot of other people are too. So I'm going to shut my trap and you tell us all about who you are and what you do and what Canine Dialogue Dynamics is all about. And take it away, Bethany.
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure to be here. I love to just discuss what I do. I'm really passionate to bring something that's a bit more refreshing into the industry for both dog guardians and professionals as well. So my story really started. I started my career in 2010, and I started in what we would call then the force-free community. I know we still use that word, but that gets thrown around a lot. But I was really just a conventional force-free trainer. I was a trainer for 10 years, and within that time as well, I was also a conventional behaviourist. So I worked with a lot of difficult cases, specifically more reactivity related issues. And it wasn't really until 2020, so I was 10 years in, and then we had the lockdown, and I finally had like a chance to just sit and not doing anything, which was really unusual because as I'm sure you're aware and familiar with, we're rushed off our feet a lot of the time, which is fantastic. And I love being rushed off my feet, but it was a really weird time for me to just like have nothing to do. So I started to really go through all of what I was doing, because at that time wouldn't have called myself then, but I would now on reflection say I was becoming more of a relationship based trainer. So it was more coming out of all of the training stuff, and really focusing on relationship more than training. And I was working in that kind of framework without knowing that's what it was termed. So when I was doing some more research on this, I started to see there were a few threads, that weren't quite tying up with how I was running things. So I started to just pull this one thread, and as it usually does, it kept going. And I'd opened up a can of worms. And I thought, oh,
Yeah, right.
okay. So I was like, okay, so I had to it started with one question, and that led to a million more questions. So that journey really started me developing the CDD method, but I wouldn't say it developed in 2020. It probably developed, it was like the finished thing by 2023. So during that time, I was still training and still working with the CDD method. And what it was really starting to look at the studies. And I was really interested in the study that was done on dogs understanding language, which was something that, as a trainer, I was telling people, don't talk to your dogs too much because it's going to confuse them. You're going to become white noise. You're going to teach your dog to ignore them. And that was something I was always saying. I truly believed it. Until I saw this study and I went, oh, okay, well, that contradicts everything quite a lot. So I
Yeah.
need to now look at this and see what I can make from this. And I did. I started to realize that there were actually times I did talk to my dog, because I did speak to my dogs, just not in a specific way. But there were things that my dogs had learned that I hadn't trained them to learn. I didn't train every single aspect of their life. And I always felt like a bit of a fraud trainer for the 10 years, because I got both my rescue dogs. We didn't do an awful lot of training. We did in the first sort of few years, like the first 2-3 years of their life. And then I just started to take steps back and realize that it wasn't what was doing them any good. So we just stopped doing so much training, although we still kept within that framework. And so I felt like, oh, I'm just a bad dog trainer because I'm not training. I'm not going out there training a lot with my dogs. I'm doing kind of some of the more relationship based stuff. But then I started to questioning, okay, but what is training and what should it have been for? Where did it stem from and what was it designed for? And so that really led me on this journey, where I realized actually, even within the force-free training community, that I was a huge part of, I was putting training at the forefront of everything. without realizing it. And so I had to sit uncomfortable for a few months while I questioned how ethical I was being when I was doing that, because I really did think it was the best thing ever. If anyone had asked me even 5 years ago, I'd have said, train your dogs every day. That's what they need. And now I'm totally different. I'm like, no, relationship first. Relationship comes first. Safety comes first. Understanding them comes first. Allowing them to have, saying no to things that they don't want to do. That's also a huge part of it, that we were kind of in this situation where if a dog wasn't doing something, just train them with treats to do it, rather than kind of question, well, why don't they want to do it? And so there was a lot of kind of going on there, and that's kind of where this whole thing started from. So Canine Dialogue Dynamics was born really in 2023. But was being developed from 2020. And it really is dialogue based. It's all about communication, but not just talking to your dogs, it's talking with your dogs. Because when you understand how your dogs respond to you, you give them, you say something, you ask them questions, and you just give them time to just make up their mind. Are they going to answer your question? And they do, just in their own canine way. So they might, say no. And each dog is different, so they will all answer it slightly differently to each other. And that also opened my eyes up to how individual they were with their body language and how nuanced that is. So one dog, might twitch their ear, and that's oh, I'm not really feeling it. And another dog might twist their head and look at the thing they want. Another dog might bark and say, yes, please, that's what I want. And so it was really about looking at those nuances. So yeah, that's really where it all kind of started from. And I really like I say, with I can see that there's definitely overlap, because you're very much about relationship. And I think that's a huge part of it. I think that's at the forefront. And that's more dog centric than it is trainer centric, if you like.
Yep. That's awesome. That is a wonderful story. Holy smokes. I feel like you and I took completely different windy roads through the forest and somehow ended up on opposite sides of the same meadow. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Because everything you're saying, I'm like, yep. I 100% agree with everything you said. Yep. That's awesome. So what does your business look like right now? What are your what do your consultations usually look like? What kind of work are you doing right now?
So I do a mix of, I see a lot of people for reactivity issues. And, again, I looked at reactivity in a whole different light as well now. So I see it in a completely different way. So I work with people to just really understand what their dogs need, and really decipher, is this a behavior that needs changing, or does everything else around it need changing?
Mm-hmm.
So really it's looking at all the other stuff. And actually quite often I'm not directly working on taking away a dog's reactivity or curing a dog's reactivity. That's not really the goal. The goal is that people understand what it is, why it's happening, and they work around it. And indirectly, because of all the stuff that's happening, that reactivity, the issues start to fade out and calm down a bit.
Right.
And we start to see. So really my job is really it's teaching people how to really see their dog, and not just see behavior. So what I do really essentially, and although I call myself a behaviorist, but I am working kind of outside of behaviorism, because it's really breaking out of behaviorism and saying and recognizing that behaviorism definitely has its place, but there are other paradigms that we need to look at, and see where do these other paradigms fit better for this particular dog, within an ethical framework, because that's what matters most. So a lot of it is not actually, okay, here's how you stop your dog barking at other dogs. It's actually, okay, let's ask the question, why is your dog barking at another dog? What is it what are they feeling? Is it excitement? Is it overwhelm? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it a mix of different emotions working alongside each other? So really we're just unpacking. So actually a lot of my consultations are online, because I don't actually need to physically be there going, right, you need to do this, and this, because there's no rigid protocol to work with an individual dog. We have to work with the dog that's in front of us. And so even if the dog is virtually in a different country, I can still work that way, as many other really good professionals can. And I think that that's something that is perhaps overlooked a lot, is the ability to work online as well, because you don't have to be there. I don't even work with treats at all, which I know is a bit of a kind of a moment for a lot of people, like, oh my goodness, how do you do it without treats? And that's, coming from someone that was dishing out treats left, right and center when I was working in that 10-year period. It was treats for everything. I started to see that there were problems coming from that. Not in all cases, and I'm not demonizing treats, but it's really the case of, actually, is there something more going on that's actually more powerful than treats? And when we're working with psychology and understanding how the brain works, it's much deeper than fixing things with treats. That, and like I say, that does have its place, but when we're actually putting that at the forefront, we're missing out so many other details about what's going on in a dog's mind. So it's kind of calming the conditioning down a bit, just not complete, because conditioning is a natural way of learning, but it's rather than extracting it in this kind of format and then placing it in front of everything, which is what I did for 10 years. And I didn't really see any issue with it. I started to see, actually, for a lot of dogs, when we stop putting that in the forefront, it takes away so much pressure. And so I started to see how dogs were responding in their natural selves, without cues and without conditioning and without giving them commands and telling them what to do. It was guiding them, but also saying, look, if you don't want to go that near that dog, if you don't want to walk that way, that's okay. We can just turn around. That's an option. That's you can say no. You don't have to go through with this. So that's kind of how the consults look like with behavior work. But also I do work with puppies as well, raising puppies in a more holistic way. So teaching them how to find themselves, like, who are they, and that they can actually do things more naturally, not over managing puppies, which is something I unfortunately see a lot, is this kind of out of I think people are just generally scared that their puppy is going to do something that's dangerous or learn something that's going to be problematic in the future. So I actually do work a lot with puppies and teaching people, like, this is normal behavior, this is puppy behavior, that's what we would expect them to do. You don't have to change it, just let them be themselves, let them be a puppy. They don't have to be the perfectly obedient puppy at like 4 months old. We don't expect that at all. And preparing them for the storm of adolescence as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, you said actually a few things there that I just wanted to pop back on. I really specifically, like, you were talking about micromanaging puppies, and I feel like micromanagement of dogs in general is a big thing that I have to help people kind of dismantle. Like, you don't need to control every minute sector of your dog's life. Like, they can make choices and do things that don't involve you, right? It's okay. And that's always a tough one for folks. I feel like, at least in my experience, is I think that they've been fed a diet of advocating for total micromanagement, and it's tough. And that goes along with, like you said, a dog being able to say no, and then I feel like, at least in my experience, again, that when I kind of introduce that concept, they're like, well, what do I do if my dog doesn't want to go that way? And I'm like, well, then go do something else. And they're like, really? Well, yeah, what difference does it make? He doesn't want to do it. Don't make him do it. Like, it's not that big a deal, for crying out loud, and they're always just kind of like mind blown that that's a possibility. And I think some people actually find that kind of freeing for themselves. That it makes life a lot less stressful for them, right? That you don't have to be like, no, we got to muscle through this. And like, no, we don't. I mean, it's appropriate to challenge yourselves once in a while, but there's no need to just slog through something that's physically and emotionally stressful for both of you, Absolutely. And I think one other thing that you said that was really important is you were talking about your journey into, through the different kind of I don't know what to call them, like avenues, like there's like the training approach. Like this is how we solve problems is through training. And then the whole idea about okay, well, uh, behavior, that's how we solve these problems. That's what we'll use, and then it's just kind of like this real myopic, micro focused on, solving problems this way. And you're talking about kind of going like, well, okay, training is a good tool and behavior is a good tool, but we can assemble much more robust toolkits to work through some of these puzzles, right? And that's where I think, you're talking about, it's essentially, I look at it like it's counseling, it's like family counseling,
Mm.
right? That's how I've kind of looked at it as I'm kind of, I'm a counseling mediator for everybody. And, I'm here to advocate for the dog as much as for you. So anyway, that's kind of some of my takeaways from what you were talking about there.
Oh yeah, I love that. Seeing it as like, because we are mediating a lot of things, and I go into families, and I go into their home, and I see the amount of pressure that they're put on. Okay, you got to go and do this protocol. You got to take your treats out. You got to go and make sure you see this amount of dogs or don't see this amount of dogs. And so I think a lot of people are just so confused, and so they're trying to get it right. They're feeling responsible for getting it right, and so when they get it wrong, they take that massive, like, okay, well, that's my fault. I'm a bad dog parent. I'm
Right.
not doing this right. I failed. And so I go in, and a lot of it is actually telling people, actually, instead of thinking like I've failed, why don't we question the method that we're using? Maybe the method is just not right for you or your dog. Maybe that's what's failing you, and it's not that you're taking that responsibility, because I can see you're putting the work in, and I can see that you're trying. So let's take, and I think it helps take this kind of polarized view that, okay, we either work using rewards and training, or if it doesn't work, we go the opposite way and we go to corrections and more punishment based. And I'm like, no, it's not one or the other. There are other ethical ways of doing this. And so if you're feeling like you strongly do not want to go down that route of going into corrections and using those kind of tools, which I hope many don't want to use that. And I truly believe even those that do never wanted to. I think a lot of people feel so much pressure and desperate to just get this problem sorted out. So
Mm-hmm.
so I'm there kind of going, you don't have to have this pressure, and actually using the CDD method, but also other more holistic methods as well, that are out there, and there are a few more out there. Just finding what works for you, finding what works for your dog, as long as your dog is happy and content, and they're not, we're not pushing them into doing stuff that they're not comfortable with. You will start to see that the behavior will change anyway, because what you're finding is you're giving your dog their voice back. So I'm not the type of person that will go in and someone will call me up and they'll say, okay, can you get my dog to stop barking? They're barking all the time. I won't, that's not really my goal. My goal is, okay, well, can we let's look at barking? What is barking? What are they saying? Because essentially that's the same as calling up a teacher or a child counselor and saying, how do I shut my child up because they won't stop talking? And so it's really important to because I think a lot of people see, okay, a dog's barking a lot, therefore it's misbehavior, therefore there's a problem. And actually I've seen dogs that are very barky, but they're very vocal, and they're having a whale of a time. They love it. They're going, oh my goodness, this is great fun. Look,
Right.
mum, look what I can do. They're just
Right.
like that little child that's like, look at me, look at me. And that's not a behavior issue. That's not something we should aim to fix.
Right.
So a lot of it as well is deciphering, okay, is this an issue for your dog where they're not coping? And is this a danger to the public or a danger to the household? And if it's not, and it's just something that's a bit of an annoyance thing to happen, and it's the dog just communicating, okay, well then we can work on that, but my goal would never be to shut the dog up, because I think that's kind of the goal, is that we kind of think that if a dog is doing something that we deem inappropriate or we deem as annoying, it's like, how do we stop that? So my question is always not how do I stop that, how do I understand it? So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's as much as it's helping dogs change their perspective and their ability to regulate them, and regulate their emotions and
Yep.
have more control of their life, is also changing people's perspective on what a dog is and who they, not who do I want my dog to be. It's who are they and how do I
Yeah.
respect that in a way where it's not affecting my
Yeah.
entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a hard conversation to have sometimes with people,
Yeah.
you know, where they're kind of like, hey, I got a healer and he barks a lot and he's always kind of nipping at people's heels. And I go, yeah, and water's wet. I don't know what, like, that's your dog. I
Yeah.
mean, we can learn to work around some of those things, but you're like, you're not going to get rid of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of what I do is like, and I'm sure with you, because I know that you do a lot of this, is really just it's teaching people to change the expectation to something that's highly unrealistic. And because it's so unrealistic, because we are as our kind of dog society, we do have these expectations of for dogs, that the expectations is often higher than we have for ourselves. We often expect dogs to
Absolutely.
behave in all these situations, in situations that we don't behave well in. And I
Absolutely.
think that that's a really important thing to recognize. It's okay, but do I do that? I mean, because I can be quite a reactive person, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that I have a behavior problem. Sometimes something happens and it's justified to be reactive about it. So
Right, right, right. No, I feel like too, back to some of the points you and I were making that I I feel like some of the culture of quote unquote dog training has put that pressure on people. And at least in my experience, I've had a lot of my students almost relieved, when I'm like, give yourselves permission to just give your dog a pass on that. Like, it's not that big a deal. It's okay. We can work around this. They're like, but I thought that I was supposed to follow up on this. I thought that I was supposed to correct him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's fine. It's fine, and you can almost see the relief in their face. They're like, oh, that feels a lot better. And I'm like, right?
yeah, yeah, it's really interesting because that came from, well, personally with my experience, it came from this kind of trainer behavior away that we used to have. I know that is dying out a bit more, thankfully, but I was under this kind of illusion that, okay, if something, I can train a dog to be who I want them to be. And I wouldn't have
Yeah.
said it that way, but essentially that's what it was. And really I learned it the hard way when I got a foster dog, and we had her a lot longer. We got her, really we wanted to keep her. And she taught me so much about how little training can influence who a dog is. And we got her as a rescue when she was just 3.5 months old, and she'd already had gone through a lot of problems in her life that she'd had in such a short amount of time. And my initial thinking was, well, I'm a trainer, I'm experienced, yeah, we'll take her in, I can fix her up, she's so young, there's so much we can do for her. And all the training did, it was make it so much more frustrating for her and me. And it really made me question myself as a trainer, because I was like, I'm not able to train these problems away. So it forced me to really look at something else, and that's really what I wrote my first book about, was going through this transitional stage of questioning what was going on. And she taught me so much about who dogs are, their actual personalities, and what we want for them compared to what they need. And I realized then that training, I could train all the stuff. She was very, if you want to call her, obedient in terms of recall, and she walked beautifully. She was a golden retriever. She walked absolutely beautifully on the lead, until there was a problem, and then she was going for it, and she was like nearly, I was going flying with her, because her emotions would go so sky high. And all training did in for this particular issue was suppress it further, and then
Yeah.
we'd get these big explosions. So I think it's kind of the pressure that training puts on everyone, really, essentially, if we are only looking through the training lens. So not just that training is terrible, it's not, but it's when we are only looking through the training lens, which I was, and training and behavior work overlap in a lot of ways, and I do question whether or not that's helpful, because that's what led me into the issues that I was having. And I think that it didn't used to be, but I think that there has been this kind of powerful overlap of training and behavior, kind of coinciding, and sometimes that does cause conflict within the dog's mind, and also at what we're doing and how we're presenting. So it's really kind of what brought me onto developing the CDD method, which I never set out to do. Never in a million years did I ever think that this would have been a result of something that was really difficult, a very difficult time for us. But I'm glad that it's happened, because I'm able to bring light into the darker areas that we don't like talking about. We tend to kind of go, oh no, that makes me uncomfortable because this is what I'm doing, and I had to sit through that. So I always do it. This is not about judgment on anyone, and I separate the method from the trainers that use it, because I was one of those trainers. So I totally get where it comes from, but I think that we need to be willing to just sit with our thoughts, sit with new information, and just ask questions. Because one of the big things I advocate for is ask questions, always ask questions. I don't want anyone to just take my word for anything. I want people to question me. I want people to ask those questions. I think we learn so much more when we are open about those questions, about, okay, but what about this situation? What about that situation? And I thought this, and that, I think that's a really healthy thing to bring into the industry, definitely.
Is questioning.
Yeah.
And dialogue. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the dialogue, it started with presenting more dialogue to dogs, but actually the dialogue is now it's equal to people as well, teaching other people it's okay to have dialogue about this, and it's okay to kind of go, yeah, this isn't for me, I'm not there yet. That's equally just as good. It's a fine decision to make, but I think that it's just good to just sit with it and just have that dialogue and talk about it, because that's how we learn. Otherwise we get stuck in echo chambers, which is why I think it took me 10 years to get to that point, because I was in echo chambers all the time, everyone confirming that what I was doing was to the book. It was all like crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And so I never got the chance to question it until I reached that point where I was like, okay, everything's coming to a head now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you see that in a lot of, those playbooks, like you mentioned. It's like if you come from a strictly training playbook, it's kind of like, well, if this is the problem, this is how you fix it. And it's a training protocol, right? And then I see what you're talking about in general with behavior, because then it's the same kind of approach. It just happens to be a slightly different playbook. And that's where you see sometimes, again, this is just my experience, is that you have trainers, quote unquote, that run into I don't want to say problems, because that sounds like I'm putting it on the dog. And what I mean is like puzzles or conundrums. Like, this is the case that I'm working on, and then I have this training outlook, and now the problem presented in the case is outside of my scope, right? And then on that same token, I've seen behaviorists that have a big, heavy behavioral background and not a lot of training background. They end up kind of taking those big cases, but then those big cases don't really reach I'm trying to think of the right words here, like a satisfactory resolution, because they're only using that behavioral background. And maybe you need a little bit of some of the other stuff, and maybe a little bit of the training too. So many behaviorists don't really have very good training chops. And a lot of trainers don't have very good behavioral chops. But then see, now we're creating this kind of binary where, like, oh, well, then the perfect solution would be somebody that's got good training chops and somebody who's got good behavior chops. And I'm like, Okay, that's 2 compartments in the toolbox. We also need a whole bunch of other stuff too. And I think that's what's exciting to me is I think that we're seeing the industry moving out of just those 2 modes and exploring other types of tools and applications and modes of thinking and frameworks that complement those things but aren't reliant on those things.
Yeah,
I don't know.
there's definitely a change in the industry. I think very recently, in probably the last year or two, I would say there's definitely been more understanding of this kind of more holistic approach, and understanding what holistic actually is and what it means, and looking at the whole dog, and looking at, okay, I think we need, and I think that does mean working with other people with different skill sets. So I think that's really a good way of being holistic, is going, okay, this might be a more nutritional issue going on here, gut issue. So can I speak to let's get a nutritionist on board.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get someone with that expertise on board, like, to just give some advice. And, equally, you've got someone who understands a bit more of the neurological stuff that's going on. So we might bring those on board and get some advice there. So I think sometimes it's also
Mm-hmm.
reaching out in
Mm-hmm.
this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really good way of seeing it, and I think I'm seeing a bit more of that. So that's
Yeah.
very, very encouraging.
Yeah.
Because
We've had a couple of we've had a couple of cases recently of dogs that they came to us, the clients came to us, and their presenting problems were, what they called behavior problems. And after we got into it, I'm like, there's physical problems too. I am seeing physical problems with your dog. Those are very likely antecedents for some of these behaviors. So let's talk to your veterinarian. Let's get a workup. Let's go see a physical therapist. And sure enough, we had hip dysplasia, we had spinal problems, we had, like you said, we found a couple of gut problems in the other ones. And I'm like, behavior and training don't fix those things, because this is where we got to work through the problem. Exactly like you're talking about.
Yeah, and the two work together really well. So you've got when we're working on health issues, the health issue itself, resolving that doesn't usually change the behavior that much. So but if we didn't deal with the health issues and just worked with the behavior, that wouldn't change it. It's the two combined. So
Mm-hmm.
it's understanding, okay, we've got a health issue here, we've got pain issue here. We have to understand that, but also we have to work with the dog's mind going through this, because
Mm-hmm.
the nervous system is affected, that
Exactly.
affects the brain. So we've got lots of correlation, and I think that it's about knowing where to reach out to, so that we can all collaborate and we can all go, oh, actually, I know someone that's really good for this issue, they can work with me on this, and not keeping it too polarized. Because I think when we polarize anything, we miss out the big picture. It's just one puzzle piece, and we're trying to just go into that puzzle piece and go, I'm trying to get the picture here, and sometimes we'll infer and we'll make a picture out of that, but it isn't accurate. And so this is where a lot of assumptions come in, and we often make mistakes in that regard. So I think it is just looking at, okay, where can we reach out to help this individual dog, and dogs in as a whole as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that, I think, brings us back to one of the main key points that you mentioned is cases like that boil down to safety, right? I mean, the animal, the dog, the individual doesn't feel safe in the environment, whether that's because of things that they're feeling or physical um, inputs that they're receiving. Um, Usually a combination of those two things. Uh, and whether we go see the medical side of things to try and resolve some of the wellness issues, and then we go through some of the other sides, training, behavior, environmental management, things like that, changing routines, schedules, the way that we respond to different things. Uh, the net result is that reinstills that sense of safety. I mean, most things I think probably hinge around a sense of safety anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's the one thing that I will look for in any dog that I'm working with is, okay, how safe do they feel? Not how safe are they? Because obviously that does play, that's a massive role in it as well, but it goes beyond that. A dog can be extremely in a safe situation, but they don't feel safe.
Right.
Um, and that's what we got to, I think a lot of people don't realize when they're looking at the dog, they're like, yeah, but my dog is safe and they've got everything they need. But it's like, okay, but what's going on in their mind? Why are they feeling unsafe? And, you know, have they come from a previous home where X, Y, and Z happened and it's like
Yeah.
compacted inside, and they
Yeah.
need to work on unpacking that in their own time and giving them the space and the time to do that. But
Yeah.
also that I don't think that training and putting that at the forefront will help a dog to feel safe. I think that comes from our relationship, that comes from the energy that we're giving off to our dogs. How are we presenting ourselves to our dogs? You know, are we rushing around being a real stress head all the time? Are we kind of micromanaging them all the time, getting on top of them and saying, right, they need to learn these training rituals all the time, and they have to follow these rules that quite often I think like 80% of rules are just not. I get the safety ones, like, you know, don't run in a road, but that comes down to common sense. And I think when it's to do with all these rules that we put in place, even through reward-based training, 90% of them just don't, they're just not needed. Does my dog
Right.
need to
Right.
sit at this point? Do they need to do this? Do they actually, like, why and this is a lot of what I do is I'm breaking the performance of training. So I think training for safety, if you want to do a bit of recall training, well, sure, that's you want your dog to come back to you. Well, that's safety. We need to make sure. But even then, we can do that in different ways and
Yeah.
make recall much more holistic. But when it comes to my dog has to perform all of these behaviors because it makes me think that they are acting this way. And one thing I talk about a lot, sorry if I'm jumping subjects, but one thing I do talk about a lot with the micromanagement side of things is that quite often for example, teaching a settle, quite often we teach a settle in a very trained way, and actually that doesn't automatically mean the dog feels settled. So we can train them to perform the behavior that we're looking for. Okay, they're lying down, they're on their bed, they're doing the performance of being settled. But when you actually look at their muscles and you look at where their focus is, like,
Right.
where's the next treat? Come on, give me the next treat. I'm like,
Right.
they're not feeling settled right now.
Right.
So
Right.
it's kind of looking at it at those angles as well.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. 100%. I think perception from the dog as a learner is stupendously important. It's like you said, we might objectively, as the humans who understand things like roads and, you know, delivery trucks, that they don't necessarily, we might objectively know they're safe, but it's the dog's perception is critically important. I always use the metaphor, I say this with my students a lot. It's like if you took your nephew through a Halloween haunted house. I know they're all actors. I know nothing's going to happen to us. I know it's all BS, but the kid's petrified, right? And it would be inhumane for me to just be like, shut up, pussy. We're going to finish this thing out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I always be like, sweetie, do you want to leave? We can just leave if you want. It's okay. And I think taking that into account is so important. And I really, really appreciate what you said about using, like, for example, that whole, like, the settle down model. And there's so much of it that I feel like focuses on what it looks like than really digging into what it feels like for the dog. And that's where it matters to me. Like, I want an authentic relaxation where they feel like they're in homeostasis, they feel safe, they're relaxed, they're just people watching, you know, just like people sitting on a porch with lemonade. And you have a lot of this from that training perspective where it's like, it has to happen, it has to look like this, you're going to do it until you get it right. And I feel like a lot of, I'm getting off on my own tangent here. You know, you said something that was really important. And I feel like a lot of training is so bloody performative. You know, it's really just almost like an ego boost for the person. Look at how all the things that my dog can do. Look at how precisely and promptly they do them. And like you said, most of it's not even necessary, right? Most of it's just like, what are you doing? Just relax, sit down.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things, I mean, when I was back when I was in like full-time training mode, right before I came onto this journey, I'd made a training course, and I went through all of the general stuff. You know, we did lucid walking, we did hill work with treats, all of it treat based, all of it reward based. And I look back at it now, and I'm like, but why do I want my dog my dog can walk on a lead nicely without staring at me the whole time. In fact, I don't want them to stare at me the whole time, because
Right.
then they're not sniffing the grass, they're not taking in the world. And when it comes to asking the questions, particularly with like a settle, I don't know, can you train a dog to feel calm? Is a state of mind? Can you I think it makes it inauthentic. So to
Hmm.
feel on to generate real authentic calmness, we have to make the changes that would create that in a dog. We need to meet their needs in that way, and that
Right.
doesn't look any particular way. One of the things that made me laugh was when I was looking back and asking the questions, okay, well, why, what, because that was one of the things, and I encourage everyone, just say why to everything. You'll be really surprised at where that leads you.
Right.
um,
Right.
so when I was looking back at these trained settles, I was thinking, yeah, but why do they even have to be in a laying down position? I can feel settled and stand up. I can feel settled and walk around, and so can a dog. And I can equally feel really unsettled and laying down as well. So I don't think I think we are so focused on what it looks like rather than what it feels like. And if we actually think about those things, ask the question, why do they have to be laying down to feel settled?
Yeah.
Um, Settled is a state. It's a state of mind. It's not a physically. It doesn't look a specifically,
Hmm.
specific way in a physical sense. So I think that was one thing, but also it's just that I did have that kind of sense of, I was proud of how I trained, because, "Oh, look how I made my dog." When you're filming as well, and you're filming for a course, and you're like, "That looks fantastic. People are gonna love that. Look how good that looks." And I had my old advert was me, like, running through all 3 of my dogs were in the down position, and I was, like, jumping around, weaving through them, like, "Look at this impulse control. Look at this.
Hmm.
Isn't this what we're aiming for?" And I did have that sense of, this is going to be, this is what people want. And so I felt good about it. But now I look at it and I'm like, that couldn't be more opposite to what I do now, to what I even want from my dog. I recognize that impulse control is not that. Like, that isn't
Yeah.
when we look at what impulse control and self-restraint is. Look at where it is in the brain. Where does it live, and what parts of the brain does it activate? And looking at the kind of impulse control, what we call in a training way, is that truly impulse control, or
Hmm.
is it a very
Hmm.
specific
Hmm.
polarized thing? So that's kind of where all the questions led me to. I think it's really exciting for anyone to just start asking those questions and see what
Well,
you come up
think
with as
about
well.
I'm sure you've encountered this yourself. How many of our clients have dogs? Oh man, we've been training forever together, and they can do all the stuff, the focus heel, the downstay while they're doing a whole bunch of hijinks around them. I can put a chicken wing on his paw and he doesn't like, and then I'm like, okay, what are you doing here? Well, he's super reactive on walks. Okay, then. So none of that jazz helped you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we look at what people think impulse control is, and I was one of them. I always remind people, like, it's not me sitting on, like, my high perch. I was one of these people. I used to think this. So when we actually recognized that, I worked with dogs that had impeccable impulse control. They could do things that I couldn't even do with my dogs. And yet the dogs would fall apart in any kind of emotional situation, because it's not working with true impulse control, which is sitting there and having the ability to go, oh, actually, maybe I'll pause for a minute. I want that. I don't know if I need it right now. Is that a good idea? You know, so adding in some, you know, rational thought, which I think a lot of people minimize a lot with dogs, that they're capable of doing that when they certainly are. And sure, not to the extent that we are, because we know the prefrontal cortex is a lot smaller in dogs, and less developed in that sense. But that doesn't mean that they can't do anything. And
Right. No,
actually,
no, no.
what they
Right.
can do is
Hmm.
really, really powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like in a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, at least for me, the biggest challenge isn't really the dog. I've always been like, the dogs are actually pretty easy. Convincing the owner of all of this and to take a different tack than what they've seen on TV or on YouTube and things like that has always for me been the biggest thing. Like I said, I think most people feel like there's a kind of relief that they can relax a little bit. Um, but it's still a difficult conversation to have sometimes that, hey, we don't need to use obedience to tackle every single problem, right? And we don't need to use corrections every single time they do something that is mildly inconvenient for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, isn't this it's always the biggest challenge, isn't it? I think, and if you look at, you know, even compared to what I did before to what I do now, does it look showy at all? No. No. What I do doesn't look showy. It won't look impressive on a camera, if you don't know what you're looking for. Because I'm not getting my dogs to prance around. I'm not getting them to do all these lovely fancy tricks that look really impressive. They're not doing any of that. But when you know what you're looking for, to me, it's more impressive. For people to be able to do that, when they send me their videos of them demonstrating the CDD method, I'm like, that's impressive, because what you did was you recognized that your dog said this, and then you responded to it appropriately, and you answered your dog, and look, your dog decided that they saw a trigger and they went, I want to turn the other way, and they made that decision themselves. Now that's more impressive, to me, when I see clients sending me those videos, than, you know, the videos that I used to make that I used to think would impress people. So
Right.
it
The
it
dog swings
looks
into a heel position and sits and looks at you and,
yeah, yeah,
wow, look, we've got another dog going with fireworks tied to his harness.
yeah, absolutely. Like, it doesn't look anything like that. But
Yeah.
when you understand what's happening, I think it's far more powerful to see dogs just being dogs, not being trained robots. I think
Right.
that the trained robotic responses, I think, are outdated. I think they're
Hmm.
as outdated regardless of how we've trained them to do those things. I just think that those times we're not training dogs to go into the military. These are
Yeah. Right.
they're family
Right.
dogs. They're part of our family. We
Right.
don't need them to do all these kind of robotic,
Right.
you know, answer us like this and respond to us in a 0.2 seconds. I want my dog to have the ability to think for themselves, choose for themselves, and I think a lot of people get scared about that because they think that it means, oh, but if I remove all control, we're just saying we're just letting dogs go mayhem, you know, like
You're
causing
right.
chaos. And it's no,
Right.
it's not, because there are healthy, safe boundaries involved with it, but within that safe boundary, you know, we've got this kind of like, okay, we know, we use common sense. There's so many things you can do to give your dogs choices, to take a break from training, to do more life skills, just life, just live like be part of their life. And that comes with using dialogue, and it's more than just talking to your dog. It's talking with your dog, it's teaching through dialogue, but it's also responding when and understanding when they're saying something back as well,
Yeah.
whether that's through their body language, whether they're vocalizing, and sometimes it's micro expressions. So I think it's a powerful thing to look for. And when you see it through that lens, you'll
Hmm.
find that those seeing the evidence of that is much
Hmm.
more powerful than the showy
Hmm.
stuff.
I think that has right there, what you said has been at least I've noticed in the last several years, a significant portion of the instruction that I'm doing in my sessions is on body language and microsignals, because most people just have no idea, I mean, they ask me things like, what's a shake off mean? Or what's a paw raise mean? Or, or I go, hey, that's good. Look at him turn and sniff there. Like, well, what does that mean? I mean, they're things that people have been in animal welfare for any length of time, like That's kid stuff, right? That's like ABCs. We learned that like 15 years ago. And, and I always have to remind myself that like, that's why I'm doing this, because most people don't know those things. And if I can clue those people into those things, like you said, it creates a much more natural response. Then when that motorcycle goes by and the reactive dog just looks at it and then decides to sniff the ground, and I'm like, that is an awesome response right there. That is appropriate for the species. That's them trying to self-manage and cope. That is dynamite. Well, he didn't look at me. I'm like, that's okay. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And one of the things I'd like to add to that as well is that when we are training dogs to perform for us, we can't accurately read their emotions because we're training them to perform what they're not actually feeling. So what
right.
we end up doing is we read inaccurate body language. We're reading the body language we've trained the dog to perform,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't reflect how they truly feel. So one of the things I always say to people is, look at your dog outside of when you're training them. Just look at them, just watch them, and study what they're doing, and try not to micromanage and try not to interfere with it. You will get a much more accurate picture of what your dog is saying, how they communicate, and how they feel, because we're not actually
Yeah.
putting a mask over the top of that. So I think
Yes.
that's a really good way of doing it as well.
And take the dog as an individual,
Mm.
right? If you've had Aussies your entire life, this one is not them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because I talk about like breed differences a lot. So yeah, breed differences does matter, but within the breed, there's so many different. Like every single dog is an individual. They all
Absolutely.
communicate differently. I've got
Absolutely.
two spaniels, but both of them are rescue spaniels. But they're like chalk and cheese. They communicate in entirely different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my dog Steve is naturally a more reserved, kind of more polite dog. He's kind of like, I'm not that out there. I will subtly tell you when I want something. So that made me do more work in studying. Okay, he's done his eyebrow twitch a bit. Okay, what does that mean? Because I had to work harder to work with the kind of micro expressions he was using. Whereas Dave is my little clown dog. He's a hilarious little comedian, but he's like a bulldozer. When he wants something, he is extremely obvious. He does not hold anything back. He's like, I want this and I'm going to let you know now. So
Yeah, 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 yeah.
it's chalk and cheese. They're both spaniels, but they operate in entirely different ways because they have two very different personalities.
Yeah, yeah. And those are things I think it's important for us. I mean, of course, I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but for us that are kind of working in this relationship centric space, I feel like I'm always trying to educate and model to people that you should relish those differences, right? If you've got a dog who's pushy, who's assertive, who's, I want what I want and I want it now. Like, okay, Veruca Salt, just hold your horses. And for me, those things are comical. I like them. They make me smile. They make me laugh. And then, I want to educate people on how do we work with that personality instead of trying to compress it, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't. I mean, because one of the things that, and this is what I was always feeling, I felt like a bit of a fraud as a trainer because I didn't want to train Dave to be obedient. He was everything but what you would term as obedient, but he makes me laugh. I love that. I love that fire he's got. I love that spark he's got. I don't want to take that away from him
Right.
because of the name of, okay, he shouldn't do that, and essentially he is a very rude dog to me, but that's okay. I love that. I think it's funny. I think that's who he is, and I do embrace that. I'm not saying we should encourage all of our dogs to be rude, but I just think that when you do have a dog that is a little bit like that, do we need to enforce politeness because it's what we expect? Because dogs don't understand politeness, really. They don't have
Right.
that
No,
instilled into. That's
no.
a very human concept. So I
Right.
think I think it's actually okay. It's not. He's definitely not the dog I expected. What I was getting when I first got him, and I love that. I love that he's not who I wanted him to be at first, because the dog I wanted would have been a fairly boring dog in comparison. Because so I don't. I think we should embrace our dogs as individuals and embrace that personality, and allow them to have that personality, because
Yes,
so much it happens when you start to do that, because your perception changes. Your dog will also notice that as well.
that's
They'll
right.
notice that change.
Because that is I mean, if we're talking about relationship as the center of that, there's all the things that you can talk about that are key factors of a relationship. Oh, well, trust and mutual understanding and love and support and all that stuff. But of course, one of the big pivot points there is respect. And I feel like that we owe them a sense of respect. And if we attempt to do all those things that you're talking about, that, I want to mold that behavior to be their personality, their temperament to be what I want it to be. And I'm going to squash or correct all the things or ignore all the things that I don't like. To me, that feels like a colossal amount of disrespect, right? And then, like, well, then of course you're having problems in your relationship. I would say the same to significant others or siblings or, you know, coworkers and management, right? You have to have that sense of respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're very quick to say that we need to teach our dogs to respect us, and to respect us as, I mean, I guess that's probably is more a kind of balance training thing, but I do think it filters through to other areas as well. But we have that automatic expect that they should respect us. And I'm like, hang on a second.
Yeah,
Why should they respect us? What do we do? I mean, we're doing the basics, sure, I get that.
right,
But why aren't we respecting them? We have to respect them. And I think this, it kind of feeds back into the original thing that I was saying earlier, is, we expect our dogs to behave in ways that we can't even act. We
right,
don't behave ourselves that
right,
well. We're not that obedient, are we really? When we actually analyze our lives, we're not,
right,
robotically obedient. We don't, when my husband calls me, I'm not like, yes, sir. I'm to your
right,
attention. What do you want from me? And I
right,
would never,
exactly,
and equally, I wouldn't want him to be that way with me, or anyone to be. But we
right,
expect our dogs to. The second we call them, they have to be on guard.
right.
Like, yeah, what do you want from me? What's
Yeah,
next?
drop
What's
whatever
next?
you're doing and
Yeah.
race over here.
Yeah. So I think we do have higher expectations for our dog's behavior, higher than our own. And I think that's a really interesting thing. But I think when we start to recognize that, I think we start to see what we may need to alter and change in the way that we expect our dogs. Let's lower that expectation, see them for dogs, and respect them for being dogs, respect that dog behavior. Because, I'd say half the problems I see in a lot of groups, with people going, help me, my dog's this, help me, my puppy's this. I'm like, that's normal dog behavior. That's normal
Right,
puppy behavior. Like, you
right,
don't need a remedy for this. You just need to, you need to understand how to ride the wave,
right,
safely, and understanding where this is going to lead, and how this
right.
is, how to help and guide. But we don't need to like get the treats out or get the punishment things out and start, training and changing, what's happening. It's just okay, like a lot of things, it's like puppy teething. Well, that's normal, that's a biological thing. Yeah, they're going to do that, and
Yeah,
it's not, babies do it. We and they go through it far more longer, and we sort of get that acceptance of, okay, well, babies are going to do that, and they are going to be, irritable when that happens, and they are going to be biting everyone and biting everything, and we
hmm,
accept it with babies. Yet when it comes to puppies, we're like, what? How do we stop this?
yeah.
We've done this for 3 days now, and it's still happening. I'm like, yeah,
Well,
this
yeah,
is normal.
yeah, buckle up. You got a lot longer to go.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, same with adolescence. As soon as a dog hits
absolutely.
about 7 months old, everybody starts, oh my God, what is happening? And I'm like, just, it's fine. It's
Yeah,
fine. You know, we all went through this. Ask our mothers, you know?
yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So we got a couple of comments. Dylan says cues are useful and help in the conversation, but them having agency and autonomy makes the cue we give them even stronger because we're communicating. I'm not telling them what to do. Yeah, I usually think of like, I hate calling it cues because I hate the traditional dog training language. Um, if I'm talking to people, I'll probably use a prompt because I think of it from my English teacher days, like a writing prompt was an opportunity to get creative about it. Um, but I usually just think of like it as a suggestion, that like if we're in a situation and my dog is like, I'm not sure what to do with this, I'll be like, how about this? And they go, oh, that's a good idea. And then we're on track. Or they go, I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. And I'm like, okay, well, let me offer a different suggestion, you know? Um, that's kind of how I look at that. Scotty, 100% I'd overcondition to Finn, auto sits at the door, etc. Sure, I do want calmness at the threshold for safety, but now I tend to use CDD. Shout out to Bethany, such as asking if he'd like to go down the garden. Can you wait for me by the door without being bothered if he sits or stands, just calm and patient? Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I feel like some threshold training practice is important just so they don't squirt through and dart out of doors because that's unsafe. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, I really don't care. You don't have to sit as long as you're not pushing through the door. I don't really, you could be doing cartwheels for all I care. Says one of Delilah's recalls today was when I saw her stalking a squirrel. I said, Delilah, leave it, please, and come. And I watched her process that sentence and choose to come to me. It was beautiful. I can see the stupendous relationship that you and Delilah have together. I mean, when you're out with Delilah, and I know that you've usually sent the videos of you walking the other dogs too, and to the other dog around the other dogs, I feel like this is applicable as well. But with Delilah, I don't get the sense that you are taking your dog on a walk. It is a fully cooperative experience where you're with your best friend, just be like, hey, you want to go on a walk? Yeah, let's go this way. Which is completely in line with how I've always tried to frame things, that this isn't something that happens to a dog. It's something that we do with them. And I see that. And I know we're kind of beating a dead horse here a lot, but it's that relationship. And you have a really strong, healthy, supportive relationship where there's two-way communication between the two of you. And I feel like that's why we see the things you do, because Delilah doesn't see your suggestion to be like, hey, maybe don't mess with that and maybe come back over here, please, as an interruption or a dead end. It just means, okay, well, we're going to go do other fun things together. Right. I don't know. What do you think, Bethany?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I point out here is that that's demonstrating really good natural impulse control and self-restraint. And through doing that with suggestions and guidance, as you're saying, that she's processing the question and kind of the dialogue that you were giving, she's going, oh, okay, oh, well, I'll come over and see you, because first of all, that demonstrates a really good, strong relationship. Because if you didn't have that good, strong relationship, she'd just carry on going, yeah, forget that. I've seen a squirrel.
Right.
I'm busy. Go away. I'm, whatever.
Right.
So the fact that she, processed the sentence again, that's where you'll see impulse control coming in, because that's the thought, there's a squirrel, but I'm being called back as well, or maybe what do I want to do? Okay, I'll come back. So there's that impulse control. One of the things that's really interesting about impulse control is that the more you practice it in real life situations and not this kind of setup situation like this, the easier it is, because it strengthens the pathways in the brain. So what happens is that your dog will start to it'll get easier and easier and easier for them to come away from things without even needing to drill and do lots of training cues. So I think that's a really lovely example of that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Whenever we do here at Simpatico, whenever we work with reactive dogs, we really don't use any cues at all. It's really completely dog driven, and we just, reinforce choices that they make that are good ones. And there's a whole spectrum of good choices, right? Like I said earlier, that might be re-engaging with the handler. That's wonderful. But that might be just turning to walk away or sniffing the ground. I'm like, those are great choices. Those are great choices. We don't have to shout about it. That's a great choice, you know? It's good stuff. Caesar, what's up, buddy? Too many schnoodles who are polar opposites. That's true. They are. How late is too late to alter the embedded personality with behavior changes? Respecting them is part of that, right? Well, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and I wouldn't say necessarily we want to alter things. It'd be like, how can we make those things work better in the lifestyle we're trying to have in our house? Which is it's a little trickier sometimes, you know, than just a training protocol. That's a little trickier sometimes. I don't know, anything you want to add to that, Bethany?
Yeah, one of the things as well is separating and learning what is part of the dog's personality and what is part of the dog struggling with something. So when we're looking at what we're altering, is it I definitely wouldn't want to alter a personality, want to embrace the personality. But when we're looking at so for example, if we're looking at a dog that, you know, is struggling with their emotions when they've got a trigger, you know, particularly with reactivity issues, that's not generally going to be part of their personality, although their personality may play a role in that. But it's not that their personality is that they are a reactive dog. So therefore we're working with the emotions, and we're working with changing the dog's perception on what's safe and what isn't safe, and that they have this ability to help themselves as well, that it's not always reliant on what we're telling them to do. So when it's like respecting their personality, it's actually seeing who they are outside of any behavioral issues that we're seeing, you know, any kind of struggles that they have, looking at their personality outside of that, because that will give you a clearer picture of who they are. And then you won't need to alter any personality, because you'll kind of go, oh, I get it, that issue here, that's actually not their personality, that's just something they're struggling with. So I hope that makes sense.
Well, that's a good point. You know, some things are personality issues and some things are environmental responses, you know, responses to environmental stimuli. I mean, some of that's, you know, of course, that's coming from a behavioral perspective, but, you know, as always, we don't want to just make it always antecedent behavior consequence, because that's extremely sterile. You know, we don't live in laboratories, for crying out loud. But, you know, that's a good point. Some of it is personality and some of it is environmental stimuli. But then how does the personality affect the behaviors that they're displaying as a result of those environmental stimuli, right? And then it isn't always about changing, altering personality, but then maybe helping them find different ways to respond to that stimuli, right? It's just like if you had, I mean, gosh, the part that this is a whole separate thing, for the love of God, but you know, I feel like the dog training behavior relationship community is finally catching up to things that we have known in child development and human counseling for decades, right? We've had these conversations with tons of, I mean, I've said this many, many times. One of my favorite dog training books is the book Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. It's a book about parenting kids. That to me is, I use that as one of my keystone dog training texts, you know, and it's talking about you can set reasonable boundaries and limitations, still respecting the personality of the child that you're working with, or the dog in this case. And then some of those things might, you know, it's not just, this is the environmental stimuli, this is my dog's personality, here's how they're colliding, these are the results. It's like, okay, but we help children learn new life skills that help them deal with similar struggles later on in life. They're like, hey, maybe this is not a really productive reaction. Maybe we could do this. You know, what do you think? And then that behavior works, which reinforces it. and then they're like, hey, that works a lot better for us, doesn't it? And then they run into a similar problem later in life, and they have other tools that they can use to deal with it. And I feel like we do a lot of the same stuff with dogs, right? Where it's just like, you have a personality. Here's a problem in the environment. It's causing a behavior that's not really working great for either of us. I can see you're dysregulating, and it's making things challenging for me. So I could see what I could do about changing that thing in the environment. Or I could, or probably both of those things at the same time, see if I can help you figure out better ways to cope with that situation that work better for both of us, right? And then you'll be better equipped later on if something similar happens. Megan, again, I'm curious as to your thoughts on how to approach to a dog with a sensitive nervous system. Molly often startles when I touch her, even if she's watching me, no matter how gently I do it. This also makes her easily startled into reactive barking. Thoughts? I don't know. Take a stab at it, Bethany. What do you think?
Okay.
This isn't a job interview, by the way. I hope you don't feel like I just threw you in there. I'm like, all right, let's see what you're made of.
No, that's fine. I do love to answer questions, so honestly. So when it comes to touch, particularly like a dog that's going to startle a lot, because if they're hypersensitive, if they're on high alert all the time, or they're a little bit more pessimistic about what the intentions are, particularly with handling, one of the things that really works well for this in particular is actually dialogue. Now, first of all, I mean, I do talk a lot about handling, and I talk about this can be extended to all sorts of different areas, to handling, to consent, to grooming, to vet checks, so that this can all kind of extend to that. But one of the things that I always talk about is when a dog is nervous and they don't know what it is, if they're kind of like, don't know what your intentions are you going to touch me, or are you going to hurt me, or are you going to look at an area that I'm sensitive about, or are you just going to go to fuss me? That just keeps a dog in high alert. And it's kind of like, and I know some of you who listen to me, you probably heard this a lot of me using this, but I don't have a lot of phobias, but I do have a phobia of the dentist. I really, really, really don't like it at all. I had one particularly bad experience where my dentist just literally said to me, right, you've got a wisdom tooth coming through, we're just going to rip that out. And so
oh my God.
So I had no time to kind of think about it and decide if I wanted that to happen. So my dentist did do that, didn't talk me through any of the things to expect. It was really painful. It lasted a long time. I think the procedure took 40 minutes. And it was brutal. I felt like I was just being beaten up. That's how I felt. And I came out and I was traumatized from this event, and I did not want to go back to a dentist, because from that event happening, my trust diminished. So I was then on anytime I was getting tooth pain, I was like, that better not be serious, because I am not going to the dentist. I'd rather deal with it myself. Anyway, eventually I did have to go. And I actually did some research, and I found a dentist who said, look, it's a really common thing for people to have a phobia of the dentist, and it's a problem because you're causing bigger problems to your teeth and your gums and your dental health by avoiding us. So we want to work with this. So they actually started using I don't know what they would term the method, but it was kind of coincide with what I do. And they started to say, look, I get you're nervous. If you're nervous and you don't want us to do anything, we're not going to do it today. I'm just going to talk you through what we're doing. I'm going to explain the procedure. I'm going to show you the tools that we're going to use. I'm going to even show you what they sound like, so you're kind of very familiar with it. I was given the choice, okay, if this is too much, then we'll stop. We're not going to start a procedure that we can't stop halfway through. So we just started with all the light kind of checkups, the poking and the prodding and all that kind of stuff. And I felt a lot better from doing that. At first I was shaking, like physically shaking like a leaf. I was in there trembling in the waiting room. But afterwards, a few times of doing this, I understood what was happening. So when he said, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, I knew exactly what he meant. And so I knew what that was going to feel like. I knew what the intention was. When we don't know what the intention is, it makes us much more hyper alert. It makes us much more easy startled, because we kind of like jump, the brain in self-protection jumps to worst case scenario. So even an innocent hand coming down, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And it's not usually a conscious choice that the dog's making. That's definitely all subconscious. That is all where the dog is in high alert, in protection mode. They go, oh, okay. When we then apply that, so we go, right, see my hand, and then we draw notice and we go, see my hand, look, it's over here. Pause, don't go any closer, and just see what your dog does. Do they kind of go, oh, no thanks, and they kind of walk away, or they shrug you off, or they kind of just ignore you? Then okay, oh, you don't want me to do that. Okay, that's fine. That's not a problem. If they kind of go, oh, I'm curious, or they come up and sniff your hand, you go, okay, see, look, can I stroke you? And you're just bringing your hand closer as your dog is leaning in, not if your dog's tensing. If your dog tenses, if they're doing anything that's saying, I'm not comfortable with this, we just withdraw. Now, this really helps because you're taking away the guessing game. So they don't have to kind of go, oh my goodness, what's that hand doing? Oh, where are you going with that? What are you doing with that? Where it escalates and escalates and escalates. We're actually just letting them know in advance. Okay, look, I've got my hand. Do you want a stroke? I've got a brush. Are you ready to be brushed, or shall we do this another day? And then you show it to them, see their response. If they say no, oh, okay, put the brush away. No big deal. Obviously, this isn't a good approach for an emergency situation. If your dog is like, you need to touch your dog to get them out of a situation, or they're in pain, or they need a vet, anything like that. But for the majority of the day, like, this is something that can easily be done with any dog. And I've always encouraged, whether your dog is nervous of touch, whether they are not nervous or they love being touched, just do it anyway, because it does many things. First of all, it gives them the ability to say no. So you're teaching them you're allowed to say no. Secondly, it shows that we listen to them, we respect them, so they trust us more. And thirdly, it gives us the opportunity to really look at what their answers look like. So when they say no, what does that look like? Is it really subtle? Is it a micro expression? Is it just a slight shift? When they say yes, is it really obvious? Do they throw themselves around and wiggle around and come in and flirt with you and all that kind of stuff? And I don't mean in a kind of nervous way. I just mean in that very enthusiastic way. So that would really help, because that helps in so many different situations, not just the touching situation, but it helps in, and it stems off into grooming and vet checks and health checks. But that could also stem into talking her through things when something happens, like a lorry goes past or a dog barks in the distance. You go, yeah, I heard that too. Oh, it's okay though. That's ages away. They're just barking it. That's just, I try to find out my neighbor's dog's names so I can go, oh, that's just Barry in the background barking. You know, we know Barry, he's fine. So, you know, it's actually just giving context to the situation, which helps dogs to rationalize it better. So they're not on their own kind of going, oh my goodness, I don't know what that is. That's like the worst thing ever. That could be, you know, X, Y, and Z. That could be dangerous. And that then really escalates. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was a good answer. Honestly, I would have said almost exactly the same thing. I came at it a little differently. You know, I learned from zookeepers who are working with big animals that you really don't have a margin of error for. And
Yeah.
there's that whole idea of, like you said, narrating what we're doing. And, you know, if I'm going to move around to a side where you can't see, I'm going to make sure you know that I'm there so that you're not startled, right? Because if you mess up trying to give vaccines to a rhino, it's bad news. And I've always taken that exact same approach. And I think I think the idea of consent is extremely an important concept to me in my training. You know, that I want a dog to demonstrate consent with everything that we're going to do, whether that consent is implied because they're engaging with me, or it's explicit in the sense that I'm like, hey, I'm going to touch you now, you know, and then they check it out and you can see that they're like, please don't. Or they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And like I've said many times on this show, at least, is believe what a dog tells you. You know, if they're say like, not right now, you go, okay, great. Maybe later. We'll come back to it. Do you have any closing comments?
Really, just if anyone is interested in learning more about CDD, I do have some groups. I have my page as well. Maybe if it's okay if I pop a comment in and just so people know where to go. But yeah, always happy to answer any questions and encourage anyone to just to look at what it means and how it's used. But yeah, Thank you all for asking questions and having me here.
And you have a course also for like instructors, for people that can then take your method and apply that to their own practice. Is that right?
Yeah, we just started yesterday, so it's a 10-week course, but it is self-paced. But it's 10 weeks in the sense that we just do some every Thursday evening we do a live, and I go through some lessons and I put the recording in the course so people can catch up. So there's no pressure and no one has to finish the course in a particular time frame. But it's really on, because what my dream is to have more CDD practitioners, have more people putting it out there in the world, whether that's online, whether that's locally, just to have, you know, professionals that perhaps have just been thinking, okay, there must be something different to apply to this, and they've kind of been thinking about how to make a difference or how to do something a bit more
A wonderful
holistically.
weekend. Keep learning, keep practicing. Give your dogs a kiss from Uncle Ian if they want it. Of course, consent always matters.